We find Vecna, we end this once and for all, together.
On December 25th.
We have a plan. It's a bit insane. Everyone in?
He knows where we are.
Watch out!
Get ready for one last adventure.
We stay true to ourselves. Stay true to our friends, no matter the cost.
Found you. Stranger Things, Season 5, Volume 2 begins December 25th, only on Netflix.
This episode is brought to you by Greenlight. Get this. Adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Spotify. Greenlight.com/Spotify.
Meet the computer you can talk to. With Copilot on Windows, working, creating, and collaborating is as easy as talking. Got writer's block? Share your screen with Copilot Vision to help spark inspiration, and use Copilot Voice to have a conversation and brainstorm ideas. Or maybe you need some tech help. With Copilot Vision, Copilot sees what you see. Let Copilot talk you through step-by-step guidance so you can master new apps, games, and skills faster. Try now at windows.com/Copilot.
Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, the horror gaming podcast and proud member of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week, we're sifting through the personality-shifting horrors of Killer 7, the demented brainchild of legendary cult designers Suda51 and Shinji Mikami. Killer 7 is set within a bizarre world of assassins, demons, and demented logic. It doesn't so much dip its toes into the surreal lunacy so much as diving headfirst in the shallow end of it. So earlier this year, we had actually covered a game that Suda51 was involved in, that being Hotel Barcelona, which unfortunately we did not love,
No.
putting it a little lightly. However, one of the things that we did talk about with that game that I think is representative of Suda51's previous games is that of these worlds that, you know, they have these like very kind of like bizarre identities to them, but you know, I think it's really is the way in which Suda51 like kind of leans all in with these ideas, no matter how wacky or strange they may be. And the thing that is like the through line is that his games are always like highly stylized, and I think that Killer 7 for me is probably the best example of that. But you know, before we get into Killer 7, what would you say is like the strongest aspect of a Suda51 game for you?
I think it's the choice of visual style. I think is always everything. Whatever it usually comes out of the game in terms of gameplay things, there will be a gimmick in that sense, but yeah, there's a very distinct look, you know, to them that makes you go, this looks like a Suda51 game. And like Killer 7 is probably like the epitome of that in so many ways. The more you see it, the more you go, this feels like no one else could make this kind of thing. And yeah, that is very much the signature of Suda. Yeah,
and that's absolutely the case, because I think even going back to like my days where I was reading like game, I forget what it was called now, but it was like not Game Informer, but it was EB Games' magazine way back in the day. And I would see games that were by Suda51. I hadn't actually played them myself, but it kind of like very early on instilled like, oh, you can identify those games just by their look, because they look so drastically different. Whether it's something like Killer 7 or Beautiful Joe, what have you, those games have such a distinctive look to them. It is this like blending almost of comic book style with like an anime influence. But then at the same time, that doesn't even really do it justice, because it is just so out of bounds with the typical types of things that we were seeing from that period. And, you know, for me, I think that the reason I picked Killer 7 to chat about this week is because, like you'd said, this is kind of like the epitome of his style. And it's a game that I think is held up very well, even though, you know, some aspects of it now, in terms of its design, kind of initially throw you for a little bit of a loop, or they threw me for a loop. But then I think as soon as I settle into this world, it kind of is just like, yeah, I just want to keep exploring it and seeing all the weird things and the weird characters. And again, like the game is unflinching in its own very sort of like unique singular style, which I can always appreciate from a creative such as Suda51.
Yeah. I mean, as we said, he's got something about him that there's a conviction in what he does that, to the detriment maybe sometimes of like the game experience. I think it's probably one of the better cases of like style over substance in most like what he does. But I think in recent years, with the variety of like games in terms of like how limited the gameplay is, I suppose, in a traditional sense, like his work's kind of gained a new sort of level to it, where it feels a bit more in keeping. Like, I mean, Killer 7 is definitely a game where then I could imagine people looking and going, well, this doesn't feel like you do very much. Like it feels a bit on rails. And yet, I think if you release that like in the last 5 years, it'd be raved about more universally probably than it was. Just because it's simple in a way that a lot of indie games that kind of have aped that style, will take bits from it. I'm trying to think what the game was that came out last year. There was that really stylish sniper game that came out where it was very limited movement, very like high style visuals, and it's just like immediately playing Killer 7 just like, yeah, there's a game that totally has that same sort of visual style, has that same idea, where you don't have to do massive amounts of stuff. You can keep your rule set limited, your gameplay limited, and like really make it compelling just by how you sort of communicate on a visual level.
Yeah, and I think that, for me, the one thing that I always remember about this game, I believe it originally came out on the GameCube, right? I know inevitably it ended up on PS2, but it was a GameCube game as well. Oh, it seems they launched simultaneously. But anyways, I remember like I would go to a friend's house and they only had a GameCube, and I remember being a little kind of just like perturbed by that because it was a thing where at the time, however, it was like, yeah, what did they have? They had Pikmin and they had Mario Kart, and that was like it. And then I remember going to their house one time and they had Killer 7. And I remember just being so completely blown away that something as weird as this was on the GameCube. It was just like so out of bounds with what I was accustomed to playing at that time. And I think that for me, again, like it's that sort of comic book style. And I think that something that you said a minute ago about that sniper game, it's like this limited sort of what you're doing, I suppose, like limited movement.
Yeah.
And, that does apply to Killer 7 in a way, the way in which you navigate the world. You do, quite literally move from corridor to corridor, but then you have to pause and like individually select which direction you're going, which at first, and even I felt this way in this last week, kind of playing the game again. It was one of those things where I was like, well, this feels a little restrictive. But again, once you kind of like get into the flow of this game, again, it's presenting this world almost in like more interesting ways, or he's so strong in his convictions in terms of that presentation that you get those like little comic book, almost like lightning bolts that let you pick the different directions that you're going. So I think that again, like this is a game where the style of it kind of has held up a lot for me in a way that I think it did originally, but certainly, all these years later, it's still pretty strong.
Yeah, I think this because of the way it's set up, there's less to go wrong. I think that's the important thing, in not being too complicated as a game, in having a very sleek, simple sort of style. Yeah, it just works, and also kind of evokes nostalgia for a time even just before that it came out. It feels very like early 2000s in so many ways like that, and being 2005 that it eventually come out. It would even feel kind of out of date for when it did come out, but at the same time, it has that timeless quality because of those choices. And I think there's a reason it's kind of had this cult following ever since. I think is because of those factors that you could come to it at any time. And go, oh yeah, no, I now once I understand it, I get the grips with it. Yeah, it makes sense, and it just looks and sounds like amazing.
Yeah, I guess I was getting a little too ahead of myself. I need to back up and chat a little bit about, the main sort of gameplay feature of Killer 7, which is that as I mentioned in the intro, this is a world of assassins, right? And you play as the lead assassin, which is this guy named Harmon Smith. And, you don't actually begin as him. You begin as one of his 7 personalities, that being Garcia and Smith. And so essentially, Harmon Smith is this guy that is able to manifest 7 different personalities. And each one of those personalities is a different assassin that, he can change into at any time in the game, basically. And so each one of them has a primary firearm, and then they have a special ability. And again, they each have their own very sort of distinct personality to them. But this is obviously one of the biggest mechanics of the game. And I think that I had forgotten just how much you had to interchange between them outside of combat. Like, I think more or less, I don't really think about their personalities in the combat sense. It's more about like navigating the world itself, because some of them have different abilities. Like one of the personalities you can change into is Coyote Smith, and he's this guy that can basically lockpick. So, periodically in the environment, you'll come across these doors. You'll have to change in real time into his persona, use that ability, and then, you could either stay as him or change to somebody else. There's Cade Smith, who, is this the only female personality, and she has this scoped pistol, but she can also do this like really fucking weird thing where she basically like slits her wrist and then blood showers from it. But in doing that, it can reveal like hidden passages in the environment. And so you utilize these multiple personalities, not only in combat, but more importantly, like in environmental traversal and accessing parts of levels that aren't necessarily like always necessary, but I think that's more of like the puzzle solving aspect of this. And the game like basically typecasts these moments. They basically are just like spelled out for the player, like, hey, you need to use this persona. But I just like the variety and personalities, and more importantly, like the justification for that mechanic being central to like the progression in the game.
Yeah, I think something that's probably a bit harder to sort of look at if you to it now, and you're maybe younger, is kind of sort of looking at it and thinking, well, why is it like this? But then you would maybe looked at it and gone, well, it's very reminiscent of an arcade game in so many ways, in terms of like how simplistic it plays. You could choose different characters, do different things like that. But yeah, just kind of tied to the Mikami sort of style as well, I think, in terms of like there's a survival horror sort of helplessness to it, because you can only move in certain directions. You can't dodge really. You have to aim and make change views to effectively find certain creatures and hit their weak points. And so it's like this weird mashup in that regard, where it is like a light gun arcade game meets a Shinji Mikami sort of survival horror game. And it's with that in mind, it's a very interesting sort of like mix of things from that era that kind of died out a little. I mean, arcades had dwindled massively, especially like in terms of like the US and the UK at that point. And survival horror, had really just had its sort of reinvention a bit with Resident Evil 4. But it's the best thing I think about Suda's games tend to be that they do feel like they're a few years further back down the track in terms of what they're doing, but coming up with new ideas with them. And when you think about a lot of the games that we've played, like say this year, or like in terms of bigger games, horror games in Horror Bites and stuff, we often praise the fact that they like take old ideas and like show us that you could still do interesting things with like the stuff that we all grew up with and enjoyed so much. And the only reason we moved on for them really was the technology moved on, and we had to sort of, when we pushed into new sort of ideas about what video games should be. And I think as we've seen in recent weeks, they're a business a lot more than they are art in many cases. So that kind of leads the majority of things. So it's always quite refreshing when you do get games that are just like, oh, well, I thought it'd be really cool if you made a game that did this, 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 and this, and voila, here you go. And so, yeah, like I said, it does feel like a game that came a few years later than it should have, but in a good way. Yeah, it does feel like it's doing something fresh with that.
Yeah, and I guess in talking about like how the game has aged, if you will, I do find that this is one of those games that has the benefit of having such a unique art style to it that in revisiting it, granted, I don't know about you, I played the remaster, which I think is the only way that you can play it on PC at this point. But,
Yeah.
in terms of that, like it is fairly faithful. It just, it looks and runs better than perhaps it initially did. But like what ultimately I think allows this game to kind of withstand the test of time, and no matter when you come to this game, it's apparent that like, oh, this is very unique for more than one reason, but like that art style and, the cell shaded graphics, the sort of utilization of red and obviously blood in this game and sort of like what that represents, how that's represented, not only on screen for what the enemies that you're fighting, but the fact that when you change personalities, your character explodes into pixelated little red dots, and then they all come back together to form the next one. Like, there's just so much of this that looks unique that it really is the type of thing where it's like, even in coming back to it this week, it's just like, oh yeah, this could have been released 20 years ago as it was, or this could have been released 5 years ago, and it's one of those sort of timeless art styles that I think is really, really held up in a way that has not been afforded to some other games that just didn't have as unique art styles. And I think that's just like a huge aspect of what makes this game so special all these years later. And like I said, this sort of like middle ground between anime and comic book graphic novel style is just, I don't know, it really pleases my lizard brain to look at this game the longer I play it.
Yeah, like I said, it's like every time I watch like videos of it, like in action, it does just feel like I'm stood in some arcade in 1999, just watching like the video demo reel for something like it seems like mind blowing. Like they can't do this on a console, sort of thing, like that. And yeah, I think that's amazing that it still kind of feels like that, but it is so damn sharp. Like you mentioned about like the red dot explosion, which obviously also happens with enemies as well. And just like it's that little short pause from like when you shoot them, it just all stops, and like you said, it does that very sort of anime inspired sort of stop explode sort of thing like that, and it looks so bloody stylish and never gets old, which is the best thing about it. Like the variety, enemy variety isn't like amazing or anything. There's like variations on themes and stuff, but it's enough with the sort of limited sort of way you can play the game anyway, and with that sort of light gun sort of intensity, where like suddenly one wrong shot can leave you with like 3 of these enemies coming at you at once, and blasting them in just the right places at just the right time just feels so like thrilling. And like if you do pull off that last shot that does just do that pause shot and bam like that, it's amazing. I mean, it's not all like the dots and stuff, as you get those sort of ribbon like trails of blood that come out of them and stuff. And like I said, it was like with one of the personalities as well, just the idea of just like wrist cutting thing, which it's an interesting idea, but it's like it's visually speaking, it's like it's excessive, but given the world of the game, it makes sense, and the way it looks works really well for it. It's a game that's like, even though it does kind of retread a lot of the same ideas in terms of what it's doing, just in slightly different ways. It's because it's just doing the visual side of it in so many fun ways that that kind of pushes you through it. Makes you want to keep going like that. I mean, there's a story to speak of, and it is sort of there in between. And again, I think its shortcomings don't matter so much, just because you're kind of gawping at how good it looks, even now. And like sure, and again, one of those things that just reminds me of like 25 years ago when you're just watching something on late night TV and it's just like a badly dubbed anime, and it's like I don't understand half of what's going on here, but it looks fucking amazing. Fist of the North Star immediately comes to mind when I think about that. But yeah, I just love I think there's something about like that 5 year period of like 2000 to 2005 where you would just get these fucking mental games, like in terms of what they were doing. And like, the GameCube had a lot of them. This was part of that sort of set of games, including Beautiful Joe, that just did like amazing things in terms of that you just wouldn't find anywhere else for a while. And it's I don't mind style over substance, and when it's done right, and this is like probably like the upper pantheon of games that do that.
I mean, this is one of I think you mentioning like Fist of the North Star. For me, this game just feels like something that I'd kind of like stumble on Toonami at like 2 in the morning. It's one of those things where like, yeah, the overall narrative and talking about this terrorist organization and them, wanting to blow up the world. And there's all this talk about missiles and this is what we're all trying to do, angels and demons and this type of thing. And it's like, it's all over the place, and it's like very on the nose in terms of its influences. But at the same time, like you said, it's so good looking in terms of both in game, but also those anime cutscenes early on that are kind of like spelling out the world and the parameters there within. That it's like I could give less of a shit if it's just batshit insane, because it all looks so good. And I think that there's something fun about that, like chaotic weirdness with which the narrative can be steered in at any given moment, that it makes it a fun world to be in, because you struggle to guess what's coming next, kind of a thing. And like outside of the personalities of the different assassins and whatnot, even you have these like two recurring characters that pop up, and like this one guy, Travis, who is just this weird guy that like is delusional and is like giving you these weird tidbits about the world. And like every time you see him, he's wearing a different t-shirt. Like one of the t-shirts will say hustle, and then the next moment it'll say like bad girl or something weird. So he's just got this like very strange energy, and like most characters talk very cryptically. So you might be able to glean something of importance from what they're saying, but that's after like this deluge of just gibberish that it's like, it feels at home in this world, but it's the type of thing that at the same time you're just like, oh my God, what is going on here? And what could they possibly have to say next? There's also that, I forget how to pronounce his name, but he's essentially this like gimp that will repel from the ceiling periodically. And he will, he says the same thing every time when he starts a conversation. It's like, we're in a tight spot, a really tight spot. And he's like, just this gross looking leather bound gimp guy that's got a ball gag in and hanging from his neck. Like, it's that fucking weird, but it's again, this kind of like unflinching commitment to the bit for Killer 7 that I think again is what really is kind of like Suda 51's signature, and that it's like, it's going to get weirder and weirder and you might only understand half of it, but we're not going to waver from this course. And I think that shows in just like the confidence with which new things are introduced in this game.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, having those recurring characters, like even the way they sort of kind of Mickey take the idea of tutorializing things, like you said with the GIMP, it's like, okay, that like slight variations on a theme each time, like in terms of like basically saying we're in the shit. Was it? I think it was Aru, I think is the name. The whole tight spot stuff like that, and I do like that, and that sort of weird, mumbly, rambly, incoherent sort of way that they speak, without the subtitles, is like adds to that sort of dreamy sort of nature of it all. It just nothing feels real. It just it feels like you're walking. I mean, given the way the game plays anyway, it does just feel very like waking nightmare, in terms of like going down endless hallways, shooting things, getting confronted by weirdos that just want to ramble on at you about all sorts of nonsense. Yeah, much like this podcast as it goes. But yeah, it's got a really interesting selection of characters. I mean, of like the main personalities as well. I think there is a bit of a sort of disparity between some of them in terms of how much they get. there are good sections for some of them, especially for like Garcia and Dan, but you don't really get all of them having that, which is a shame, for the kind of game. It sort of hints at certain characters, but really they are just like, here's what their gimmick is, here's what they look like. I think Katie, the female personality, is a great example of that, where it's like she's more gimmick than character in a lot of cases, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I think it's got enough interesting characters to sort of be going on with as it is. It's probably just a bit overstuffed with characters because of the nature of like the game itself, and ironically, then, like I said, the enemies themselves being quite generic, in a lot of ways, outside of like the bosses and things. It is unfortunate, but again, I get it. It's the GameCube, and it's all these great ideas and sort of compromises to make it a very simplistic game in so many ways. So you can see where the focus was wanted, and that is in certainly like, here's a person with 7 different personality types, and then these like side characters, and the ones that are important. The rest are just kind of like, well, like it's just to have a bit extra in there.
Yeah, that's definitely the downside of the numeral being 7 in the title, is that you have so many of these unique personalities, and they get their moments, but inevitably some will be overshadowed more than others. I think that's where the nature of the environmental traversal or puzzle solving comes into play, right? Because you can use what was it, like the luchador, Mask Day Smith, right? He has not only grenade launchers, which he can use to like blow open walls, but he also is a luchador, so he can like suplex heavy beams if they're blocking a door, type of a thing. And again, the world kind of like typecasts these moments and quite literally puts them on your map for you. But at the same time, like, at least they have some of these instances where you are forcing the player into experiencing these other ones, but naturally we would have preferred for them to be a bit more organic, I suppose, in terms of like utilizing each one of those personalities, rather than just saying like, hey, you have to use it here. Just giving a bit more reason outside of just like maybe which one you prefer to use in combat the rest of the time. But I suppose by that same token, like the character Garcian, who is kind of like the ringleader of the assassins, he's the one that I use the least, because I just don't like he has a silenced pistol. It's like a Walter PP7 basically, and it's like pretty shitty compared to all the other ones. But at the same time, he's the sort of like the reviver, because if one of your personalities dies, it's like, oh, okay, I'll just go and pick another one. But if you want to kind of reclaim that one, you have to play as him and then go pick up like their literally severed head. So like mechanics like that, I think, are smart, because they give you an incentive to actually play as one of the personalities you might not have a preference for. But I suppose I just wish that there were more instances of that, or some of the other ones, because there are definitely going to be personalities that I did not use nearly as much as you did or anybody else. But I just wish that maybe I was incentivized a bit more to check some of them out. I guess, who is one of your go-to personalities that you used, and what about their character kind of appealed to you the most?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed Garcian as an idea. I think it's a shame that it's kind of given that sort of background sort of role in the game. Master Smith, like, I think it just is fun to use, like, as a concept. Like, it's just feels like the perfect thing for a game in that regard, where you just like, like, of course, a luchador that is also an assassin and can do all this weird shit. Like I said, it's some of them just make it very easy to pick their weapon set, as you said. It just makes sense, like Con, just because it's such a stupid power to have, like, just to be like, he can sneaky run fast thing. It's like, it just feels so like underwhelming compared to our characters, but it also kind of looks cool, like, in terms of when you have that sort of first person view. I don't know, it feels like a right little fucked up gremlin of a character compared to other ones like that, which is like, that'd probably be my favorite one.
Yeah, that's a funny way to describe him, and because he does have that very like distinct running style where he's
Yeah.
leaning forwards, he's low to the ground, he's obviously much faster than all the other ones, but at the same time, it also means he has a smaller hitbox than some of the other ones because of his lower stature. And I think also like what I like most about Conn Smith, and it's one of those things where it speaks to overall again that just like the over stylized presentation of seemingly every aspect that's actually mundane, but again, like going the extra mile to make it slightly more unique is that when he does, given his speed, he does this crazy reload animation where basically like ejects his mags, puts in new mags, and then does this like double kick where he kicks the mags back into the gun and then like cocks them and then just is right back into the action. Like it's so over the top and dramatic. But every time he does it, it's perfect. And all of them, whenever you have to reload your weapon, you get this basically like brief little not it's almost like a cutscene, I suppose, where the camera pans in front of you or low at this dynamic angle in front of the assassin. And then, you get to watch them reload their various firearms in a, again, very dramatic fashion. Like it kind of has this like Western feel to it sometimes, depending on who you're playing. Like when you're, I think it's, what is it? Dan Smith, who's a guy that has like the 357. He does this very dramatic, like flicking the revolver out mag out, and then he's just like dumping the bullets on the ground and then loading them in real quick and then snaps it back in. Like you get these cool little sort of like very anime style actions, and the way that the game like hyper focuses on their presentation, I think again is like they didn't have to do that, but it does make it just like finding the most cinematic way to do things. I find is like again ultimately pretty entertaining more often than not here.
I think it's also like combinations of characters with bosses as well. Kind of like I think that thing you said about westerns makes perfect sense, because I think there are some fights that just can be over in like seconds. Just like, and they have all the preamble, and I think an early one is Jean de Paul, who comes up against Mask. Like this gives him all that shit, and you can literally just take a bit of the ceiling and knock him out in one blow. Like it can end like that, very quickly. But yeah, I think that, and because some of them are connected with stories for a character like that as well, it does give it a little episodic feeling at times, which is cool. And like, even though they're generally quite fleeting, a lot of the boss battles as a result, like it's still. I think one of the longest ones outside like the end run, with like the Final Order and that, is like the Handsome Men, which are just like Power Rangers, effectively, which is fantastic. That just sort of like taking on each one by one sort of thing in a versus contest. I really like that as a format, for the boss. And I mean, when that bit happened, I was just like, yeah, this is great goofy fun like that. A lot of the boss battles up to that point were like, they're cool for the story and the moment of the characters and like getting a bit more out of the characters. But they did just feel like they ended too quickly like that. And there was usually a lot more like monologuing than there was fighting, which is again, it's very like gun happy. It's like, I do like the variety in terms of like the pacing of fights, where some are really, really short, some are like really silly, some are like quite cool and intense, and like the visual style is like perfectly in keeping. I mean, they all generally revolve around the same thing, which is like find a weak spot, shoot it, find a weak spot, shoot it, like that, and move around the room. And of course, because you are so limited in terms of like you can only go, wherever the game tells you can go. The strategy is fairly simple. I think that's probably why the fights don't last long, because they would just be bloody irritating. I think there's definitely a bit of that when you get towards the end, especially with like the Final Order and that, and against Lion at the finale. They do start feeling a bit like Jesus, But I mean, even like the Final Order, it's like there's a lot of like waffle in between. So like it doesn't feel like you do too much, but it is a game that like seems to rely on just having like bite-sized pieces of it, to play, and like then just deliver you like some cool stuff in between. Like as I said, doesn't always make sense, doesn't always feel like it's doing much for you in terms of progressing the story, but it does enough and it looks good.
Yeah, I suppose for the bosses, like it kind of feels like the Capcom methodology that we've seen with a lot of like Resi games or Lost Planet type of games, where it's just like, yeah, they can be boiled down mostly to like, oh, you gotta run a circle around this boss and then like shoot these masks on their back, and it's like by the end of the game, how many times have I had to do that? But it is one of those things where it feels very anime, right? And that you've got this massive melodrama dialogue build up, and then the fight is over in about 90 seconds, if that. But let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we can delve a little bit more into the game's combat, because that is also one of those aspects of this game that I think is quite unique in just how it's presented and how they kind of have this hybrid between combat and then these on rails movement sections. But we can chat about that and more in a moment.
Kraft mac and cheese is the best thing ever. It's even better than pop music. You look just as natural enjoying us at age 13 as you do 55. Kraft mac and cheese. Best thing ever.
This episode is brought to you by McAfee.
I found this great place to stay this weekend.
Click on the link and book it.
Oh, wow. McAfee alerted me that this site is fake and even blocked it.
Cyber criminals create fake sites to steal your passwords and financial data. McAfee identifies and blocks these sites to keep you safer online, so you can book your trip without worry. Learn more at McAfee.com/online protection.
REI Co-op presents a perfect outdoor moment with the perfect gift. Picture this. You're ripping with your favorite person. Bluebird skies, blower powder, and frankly, you're skiing like legends.
So sick. Another lap?
Thanks to REI's curation, from lid to sticks, you nailed the gift.
No way. How'd you know?
Does it get more perfect than that? Give without guessing. Shop in store or visit rei.com.
And we're back from our break. And as I was saying before, one of the most defining aspects of this game, I think, is like how you traverse the world. And that, unlike most action games that are in third person, for this one, you're literally strapped to rails, even though, you can't literally see them. So like if I'm going down a hallway and I come to a fork in it, the game stops me from progressing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you get these two like big lightning bolt almost style comic book panels that pop up, and it tells you like, oh, you can go down this corridor or this corridor. And so that's how you navigate the world. And, I'm curious for you, like, how do you find that aspect of this game all these years later? Obviously, it's restrictive in your movements, but what do you think that either adds to the experience? And, ultimately, do you think that's like a detractor from sort of the fluidity of the game other than that?
I think it helps to get to the point quickly, as we were sort of saying before, with like the boss fights and stuff, and just general play. Everything is pretty straightforward, and generally the idea is to go forward as much as possible. But you do have to get these branching bits and different characters being able to do different things for different parts of the levels. I think it's only early on where you're kind of getting used to this format, where you get the usual thing of like which way have I turned? Where am I going? Sort of thing. Like, have I gone the wrong way and like ending up walking too far the wrong way? But which even with like really simple layout is possible, just because of the way the cameras shift and you having little control of them outside of combat. But yeah, I think it works for the game in general once you get used to that, and I think that's probably after like you get past the first boss, really, where you have got a real sort of idea of what you're doing. But yeah, I think it's the perfect setup for it. I don't think it ever sort of pushes it too far in terms of like too many choices. It's like you get a great sense in that first chapter or so of how the game works in that regard, and how you get like how you progress things. And yeah, I think the more you're sort of forced into using certain characters as well, it's kind of done in a way where you it gives you a bit of more insight into how the world works and what you can unlock where. And like we said, you can unlock different pathways and get in different areas depending on who you're playing as. And I mean, they're very reductive in terms of like, okay, I could have just had all these abilities in one person, and technically you do, but it's like still, it's an interesting way to sort of handle it, I suppose, where it feels like, well, I'm just controlling different characters with different abilities, but not as a squad that are all together in a way. So yeah, I quite like it for what it's doing. So I think the vision was there from the start to just sort of say, well, this is how we'll do it. We'll drip feed it. It's very simple in a way that people will come back to it with different characters, try different things. Again, not like there's a massive expansive amount of things to do, but enough that you can like go for a little bit and go, oh, I wonder what would happen if I had this character here, and how I could tackle these bad guys. And while there's a lot of hand holding early on in terms of like suggesting what you should do, who you should use, things like that, it eases off just enough, I think, like that. And then it's only when certain things come up where you kind of push down certain avenues with the characters. And yeah, I think the main thing is just being straightforward is important, I think, for this game. And that's probably another one of those reasons why it remains like quite playable to this day.
Yeah, I think that for me, like I like the sort of streamlining that applies to this game, but at the same time, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like I find that sometimes it's a little difficult to navigate, which is hilarious considering the game is quite literally on rails. But I don't know if it's that aspect of it or if it's also like the map for my liking. I think a lot of the times, like when you're going through different environments, like so many of the corridors are literally just called like hallway or something like that. And sometimes when I go to the map and the map doesn't specifically tell you where you are in an environment, it just kind of like highlights it in certain sections, like a la Resident Evil, which I think for a game like Resident Evil, like whether it's Spencer Mansion or, Raccoon Police Department, like those environments are so highly detailed and you basically start to learn them like they're the back of your hand, not only because of backtracking, but also because of the fact that each section of it is so uniquely distinctive to the one that you just were in previously. Whereas some of the environments in Killer 7, I think, kind of start to blend together, especially the first like 3 levels or so. I think some of them kind of are just like, okay, yeah, I got it. Another hallway that kind of just looks exactly like the last one. And that at times was a little difficult for me to traverse those environments. But I think, the contrast between on rails movement and then snapping to first person for combat at any moment is something that I really like about this game. And I think, again, like it speaks to sort of just this very unique vision of this third person, first person thing where, it's funny when we were talking before the podcast, we were talking about how the phenomena where like contemporary games will get credit for being the first one to do something, but then we have 3 or 4 examples of games from, 10 years ago, 15 years ago that were doing features like this and that people just, are not as familiar with it for this reason or another. But like here, the hybrid between third person for environmental traversal and then first person for combat, I think is one of those features about this game that was really ahead of its time. And we would see that in games even, to this day, to a little bit of a lesser degree, but like there's this horror game that I think we covered for Horror Bites called Holston, that's supposed to be coming out next year. And that game's whole thing is that you can snap from, in that case, it's a isometric view of the environment. But then when you have to get into combat, you snap right to third person over the shoulder. And so like, again, we've seen games play around with this concept of perspective shifting, but Killer 7 is probably the oldest game that I've played that includes this kind of thing. But how do you feel about that sort of shooter aspect to Killer 7's design?
Well, yeah, like I sort of said earlier, it's like it has that sort of arcade shooter vibe to it. It almost does feel like you should be pushing down a pedal to transition between the two things, a la Time Crisis sort of thing. But yeah, I was surprised by how smoothly it was done. But again, this comes down to the simplicity of everything. Like the Heaven Smile enemies like announce themselves with that little laugh. So like before, you won't see them necessarily until you do the snap, but it means when you snap in, if you don't see something immediately, you have to sort of change your viewing option so you can see it. Because you have like several different viewing styles to sort of see different. I don't know why exactly it works that way, but it does. Yeah, and basically you can see some in certain ways and some in other ways, and you have to sort of hop between like viewing versions to see certain weak points and whatever. But the consistency is always there. It's never treating you unfairly and like trying to trick you by saying, "Oh, here's a sound," and nothing's coming up, or not telling you there's anything coming up and no sound. It's consistently like, you heard it, check, there'll be something there. And then it's just a case of figuring out what you need to do in that combat situation. And yeah, I think by sort of boiling it down to like, hit it in these certain spots, you have to reload, which comes to a fancy animation, which I did find sort of added to the intensity a bit, because it sort of takes you out of like the first person view for a moment to sort of have that sort of stylish reload animation, which again, very arcade game in terms of how it's doing it. And yeah, you kind of feel vulnerable in that moment because like when I come back, how close are they going to be, sort of thing, like that, even though it's like a couple of seconds of time. And so yeah, it's like I said earlier, like missing even like a single shot on later ones, it can be very like brutal if you're not like if you don't quite get the right person at the right time. Like obviously, if you like take out a leg, they can still crawl towards you, stuff like that. Like dismemberment system, which is kind of cool. Yeah, like having that. There's all sorts of little things, as you said, like here where you like there are games that come later that do similar things. Like even like in Garcia, and like picking up like effectively the soul of other killers to like reclaim them is very much what like From Software were doing, and would do quite popularly in Souls games. And yeah, that's the cool thing about it, to have all these cool ideas in such a tight package, especially with the shooting. It works like that. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. I mean, the game I was mentioning earlier that had a similarity was, I think it was Children of the Sun. I think was the sniper game I was thinking of. Like that, that's a game where it's like, the idea is like going around in a semicircle, picking a spot, trying to get a bullet to ricochet between all the targets and level. That's it, like that, and that's the beauty of it. That's why it's got like a Moorish sort of flavor to it. Is trying to figure out that puzzle. I mean, this is very simple by comparison. You are just trying to shoot them in the right way. But the good thing about it is like you have that sort of blood system where you can like get the two different types, the thick and the thin blood to like power up your stuff and like that, and basically so you can get like super shots off, like to take down certain enemies quicker. Like that, which I mean, as much as it explained it early on, it was still like kind of just working out as you play. Really, I think was more of the case. But it was nice that it kind of added something to this whole sort of bloodshed that was happening, to know that even like visually speaking, you can see like the two different types on screen happening a bit as well. Like that, like I was saying, like the ribbons of blood and stuff representing the thin blood, and yeah, I mean, it's not like out of this world in terms of like shooting, but it's good enough. Which at a time where consoles were still very hard at doing the shooting stuff well.
Yeah,
and I didn't play this on GameCube, so I can't imagine how that controller was with this game. But at that time, but yeah, like playing it on Steam Deck, and it was like really simple, like really easy to use.
Yeah, I'm jealous that you got to play this on Steam Deck. Again, we were talking before the show. I'm like this close. People can't see my fingers naturally, but it's one of those things. I'm like right on the cusp of getting a Steam Deck, just that way I can play through some stuff on the go, or not even on the go, just in bed, not balancing my gaming laptop, my massive, just it's basically like a portable heater whenever I try to run stuff like this. So, but anyways, yeah, I think that when we talk about the game's combat, this is where Killer 7 like really shines with its horror aspects to it. Like, obviously Heaven Smiles being demons, right? But they kind of look like the Regenerators from Resi 4, which is again like traumatic every single time one of them pops up on screen. But to your point, like you being able to dismember them, and that's one of those features of this game that I think, like, within a year of this game being released, or within the same year probably, that's a feature that would have been on the box, right, in terms of the
Yeah.
marketing, because of like, oh, a dismemberment system. Resident Evil 4, you could kneecap guys. Like, oh, in Killer 7 you can basically blow their legs off or blow their heads off. Like, those types of things would have definitely been like box quote features. But there is a survival horror sort of tinge to this. No shocker, since Shinji Mikami was the co-writer of this game. Like, there's going to be that influence there as well. And it could be something as simple as that laughing mechanic, which I think it's not a mechanic, but that laughing tell for announcing enemies. The fact that you can see their basically translucent silhouette, but until you scan the environment, you can't actually see them all in their demonic, cell shaded sort of horror. But that right there is one of those cool features where you have to scan environments, and sometimes when you're changing positions in the game, you can basically swap the direction you're facing and then move in that direction, but then you have to like do that again to face them. And so there's this kind of like backtracking, giving yourself space to kind of like get a little bit of distance between you. But then, as we also have been talking about with that reload animation, like, oh, you have to pause for a second and it obscures your view from whatever you're looking at because of the fact you get this cinematic almost that just shows your character reloading, which causes you to have to really time those reloads perfectly. Because otherwise, if you don't, you're going to swap back to your first person perspective, and then a Heaven Smiles is going to explode right in your face. And also that laugh is just like really terrific, because I think every single time it happens, it's creepy, but it's also informing you that, hey, there's a monster in the area. But then at the same time, like, them laughing as they're dying and then they explode into a shower of blood, like, that's also just this, like, again, this fucking weirdo sort of sensibility with everything in this world, which I just love to see it. Basically every single aspect of this game is just like so strange, but so confident in what it's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It does know how to sort of handle these things nicely. Sorry, I just thought of another like boss thing. There's like that one later on in terms of like the Heaven Smiles. I think it's when the fucking one that's the boss, big fat guy swinging on like a rope. Like, and then when you basically pinata him in half, like he like it gives birth to like those black Heaven Smiles, like, and stuff like that. They like, that was a nice little evolution of those. Another cool thing about that laugh as well is, like, when you do go through longer corridors and stuff, and like you're waiting for it like that, and just the anticipation, and it's like, while it's not like dread, so to speak, because like I said, it's not that tough, but it is like, you do have that sort of anticipation, like when you're used to like horror based stuff, like it's like that's what it's more like. It's more like waiting for the lip of the roller coaster ride, when you just go before you hit the dip. You want to find that moment. So that's kind of like that, where you are just waiting for it to get into that moment and to have a bit of that intensity.
Yeah, that intensity is one of those things that I think also, even in, outside of boss fights, we've mentioned that like the variety of the Heaven Smiles kind of like, let's call them fodder enemies, are not necessarily like that. I suppose they are kind of unique when you think about just the ones in this game, but like it's not a variety of abilities that you haven't seen in other action games, right? They all explode, but there's the walkers, there's the runners, there's the one that has like a shield over him. So you have to make sure that you time your shots perfectly right. But like, there is a real level of tension I find in combat the further into the game you get, because they start mixing these different varieties of them together. And knowing that you have a limited amount of shots before you have to reload, which is going to, again, obscure your view. I found that can make combat very tense, especially depending on which of the killer personas you're using. So like if I'm playing as Katie, and then, there's two crawlers on the ceiling, and then I have to deal with them, but then there's two runners coming at me, and then there's one of those spheres where you have to basically wait for the face that's glowing to shoot it, but it's got four faces, so it keeps rolling and rolling, and like once you're kind of trying to line all these things up, it can make some of those encounters in combat very tense, especially when, again, most of those guns are, like revolvers or don't deal as much damage as some of the other ones, like with the Khan. He's got dual Glocks, but, dual Glocks don't do as much as a 357, so don't really have that much of an advantage there unless you time your reloads and you're traversing the environment well. So, yeah, combat is pretty multi-layered in that regard, I think, in terms of like taking the action-oriented nature of the game's mechanics, but it really does have this survival horror tinge to it that I think is really great in terms of just, again, like utilizing aspects of genre in unconventional ways. I think is really great here, and ultimately just makes combat that at a surface glance seem, might seem plain or routine. It kind of just has this little extra sort of tinge to it, but also like the notion of death, right? Because if you die in the game, it's obviously not a traditional death. You lose blood, you lose that personality until it's recovered with Garcian, but then, you have to fall back and you have to have a roster of guys in specific order that you like to use. Cause, even though it's not game over, it's like, you're going to be basically inconvenienced to kind of get back to where you were at before your death.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the thing with that you do deal with death in such a simple way. I think there's just so many mechanics of it that do feel quite fitting at the time. I think Capcom were using a lot of games to sort of experiment with ideas from one to the other to the other to the other, and like you said, given what was going around this sort of time, you think of like in terms of Resident Evil games, we've mentioned 4. There's a lot of 4 in here in terms of especially like finding weak spots and the snapping to a more sort of hands-on view. But I think even like Resident Evil 0, like in the character swapping thing, like that, there's that too. The style profile of stuff like Beautiful Joe, and it's I do enjoy that sort of period of gaming. I think it happened with lots of companies at that time where they use one game to experiment on stuff for the next. Even if they were unrelated, like say like Rockstar did with like Max Payne 3, like they put social features in that game that would end up being GTA Online stuff, cool. But even before that, they would use stuff in Bully and Manhunt that would eventually come into GTA games. And this period of like Capcom, one of their first sort of golden ages, I suppose, if you will, they did so much cool stuff because of that, because of collaboration and like having people coming in and out and doing all these cool things. I mean, what's the original version by Capcom with this one? Or I might be wrong now. I suppose in the Mikami vibe, okay. In saying that Mikami is involved, that's more what I mean, I suppose, in that. Yeah. But yeah, it's like having that input and the ideas that might come out of it and around it, that it does help. And I think, that's definitely, it shows, and it's a good thing. So ignore everything I said before, but the main thing is the Mikami involvement is the important thing.
No, but I think like at the very least we got the Killer 7 handgun in Resi, right? Or is that the other way around?
History, man, it's too far.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, it's because the PC version's by Nice, the publisher. That's why it like threw me off for a second. I was like, oh shit, I've got it wrong. But yes, it was part of that Capcom bunch. So re-regard everything I said.
Mm-hmm. More often than not, you have the right memory for these things. So I'm usually the one that goes by you for those.
Oh yeah, time goes on.
Yeah, I suppose like this is one of those things where when you think about 20 years ago, what games were like, Killer 7's being this like hotbed for ideas or feeling like an amalgamation of ideas that you would see pop up in other games. And at the same time, the types of games that were coming out, whether it was on PS2 or in this case, like GameCube, like I just think that stuff like Killer 7 and even like the original Metroid Prime, those were types of experiences that I think were kind of like, I did not have a lot of experience playing these games way back in the day. I had bits and pieces of playing them, but at the same time, I do remember that these were some of the first games that were making me view sort of the like hotbed of ideas that were changing my perception of how games could be presented, I suppose. Because again, like those are both games that have third person perspectives, they have first person perspectives for combat, but ultimately I'd never seen that kind of thing like blended into one in the way that I have with obviously Metroid and Killer 7. So like seeing so many games adopt those types of cross perspective, cross genre sort of hybrids is one of those things that again, like I think Killer 7 deserves a lot more credit than perhaps maybe it gets, but at the same time, like there is a reason why this is such a cult game because of whether it is those ideas or overall just like this very strange but confident presentation and the horror aspects to it that we've mentioned. Like that's definitely a big factor in giving it its personality.
Yeah, I mean, and when you think of this being part of that Capcom 5, as they put it, at the time on GameCube, that were supposed to all be like exclusives, which infamously didn't end up being exclusives. Yeah, I know some stuff didn't get made. Beautiful Joe obviously had a cult following in itself, but Dead Phoenix was and all that. And Resident Evil 4 was Resident Evil 4, but it's quite interesting that Killer 7's like next to that in terms of the games that were out. In terms of Resident Evil 4, it's remembered still like that. I mean, Beautiful Joe probably deserves it too, but I think it's just we haven't really had a version of it since that's kind of given us that. And the other stuff was just like shrug at your shoulders by comparison. But yeah, it's still that style, that quality, and that simplicity. I think it was like when you consider that stuff like Resident Evil 4 was there and how complex that is by comparison, it's a nice sort of alternate, to have a studio at the time publishing two games that share so many traits but are so massively different, like is fantastic, and in years where there were just an insane amount of like games anyway, like that were just amazing and like have stood the test of time. It's like creating a cult classic like that, and with that competition, even in house, it takes something special.
Yeah, I find I talking to you periodically over the last month or so, like games that I'm very nostalgic for around the holidays when I have this like abundance of time that I don't have in the rest of the year, and I find that I end up replaying a lot of stuff. So it felt kind of only right to pick Killer 7 while I'm in this bout of nostalgia, but at the same time, getting to re-experience something that I never got around to finishing previously. So I was glad to have the opportunity this week and really dig into this in a way that I've just been kind of looking for an excuse to, because it is still so unique. And more importantly, I think sometimes when you go back and you play games, which Christ, thinking about how this game is 20 years old is not good for my mental health this time of the year, but it is the type of thing where I find that this game is still a ton of fun to play, which is not always the case when you go back and replay, 20-year-old games. Like, sometimes it can be the rose tinted glasses thing, but for me, like to spend a whole week playing this game and it not have that sort of like archaic feel that sometimes I'm accustomed to when replaying stuff was just as much a reason to replay it as anything else like genre wise about it that I like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's very hit and miss with terms of what was working. When you go back to it now, like from that year, I mean, Burnout Revenge was still good, I suppose. Shadow of the Colossus, I mean, it's still fiddly by comparison. And like God of War, we've talked about that and how that was. And I think even in like the original version of Resident Evil 4, it's like been kind of tweaked nicely in later versions. So I mean, and fucking GTA San Andreas, I think, came out on other formats that year, but I think it was, but still, comparatively speaking, complex stuff in the sort of chase for like bigger, better, more sort of thing. It was nice to have developers that were just like, no, just like games don't have to be. You can keep things simple, shorter, stylish and really just stamp your identity on something.
Yeah, and to play a game from this period, oh wow, yeah. Just thinking about like how this was a game that I think, what did it take me? It probably took me like 10 or 12 hours to finish, maybe just a little bit more. But like, I think one of the things that helps this game for me not outstay its welcome is what you had mentioned, which is kind of this like episodic feel almost to it.
Yeah.
The way that you can break up those hits, and each one of the hits really does feel like its own self-contained story, mostly because, it's jumping around to different time periods and different locales. And it was just nice to have something that, while it was about, now I'm thinking about like 13 hours, I think, for me to finish it, it didn't feel like it dragged at any point, because if I needed to take a break, it was a short one usually, because of the fact that it doesn't just feel like the same string of corridors, if you will. So I think just with that in mind, this made for a very easy replay. And if anything, it's like, yeah, usually when we cover a game and we have a good time with it, it's easy to recommend it. But like Killer 7 is really easy to recommend for people to play, because it's devoid of much slog, in my opinion, which I think is great.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think once you get into it, once you get past that opening bit and start to understand what it is doing, it just flows so nicely. It just it's a game that feels nice in bite-sized chunks as well, which is, one of my early concerns was like how like the save system worked, where it's like you have to go in the room when like the assistant is dressed up as a maid to be saving the game, and it's just like, what? and missing that the first time around, going, where the fuck? I couldn't figure out where to save for a while. Like I had to look it up, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that does definitely feel like something from 20 years ago. But still, it was like, again, once you get in the rhythm of that and knowing how that works, doesn't matter so much like that. Like, and again, it kind of means that when you do get to a save point and you've done a chunk of game, you can go, yeah, I'll leave that for now. I'll come back in a bit and play a bit more. And I must have done that a few times, I think, in a single day, where I would just like play a bit, to a checkpoint, save point, stop, do something else, come back, and just, I did a good chunk of the game in a day on that alone, I think, and just in those little bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, there were a few instances where I was ready to take a break, and I went into one of the Harmon rooms, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, well, it seems that this is not one of the save variations of that. I guess I will go back to the beginning of the map and do that. That's probably the most outdated aspect of the design, but I think even the size of the environments, it only adds a couple extra minutes. And once you get a handle on that, like you said, it's pretty easy to sort of like see those things coming in terms of like the time distinction with when you should save and when you shouldn't. But other than that, it's smooth sailing this week with revisiting Killer 7. But in terms of next week, we are going to kickstart our Game of the Year coverage, the big double episode special for the year. And as has been the case every year, it is even more daunting, it seems, than last year, given that we've had our lists, our lists for weeks now, and yet they seem to only be getting longer and longer. And now we have to really fine tune them and whittle them down to our top 10, which is a joy, but it's also like, killing one of your kids every time you come across something off that list.
It's weird, isn't it? Because this year we didn't do like a halfway point of the year episode. And because at the time I said, it's like, well, I don't think I've really played enough to really talk about at the time. And I don't think it's probably not long after that it just started stacking up and like game. And it's like, and then and when we started talking about this a few weeks ago, and it was like already like I'm struggling to put this many into 10 places at this point. It's still the same problem is there, and I've added to it, as you said as well. It's like we got more stuff in the last few weeks, I think, which has really just gone, oh shit. But yeah, I think we had that a bit last year, where just some stuff just came a little too late, because December stuff and the way we do stuff, unfortunately, it means that. But, doesn't mean we love them any less if they're good. It just means they missed out for that reason, at least, and didn't have to go through this cruel punishment of not getting picked.
I think in the last week I've added 4 things to my list now, so it's one of those things where I'm gonna have to give myself a hard cutoff, I think, this week. And no, I can't add anything else to it. But now my list is about a third longer than it was just a couple of days ago. So there's that. But yeah, like you said, it's a good problem to have. I get to spend the week replaying some things that I've already enjoyed. So, it's a good problem to have, I suppose. And calling it a problem is not really doing it justice, I suppose. But yeah, we're going to delve into that and more. Additionally, we will be doing our horror bites of the year next week as well, where we're going to highlight 5 horror bites from the year that really stood out to us amongst the plethora that we've played this year. And we'll get to run through those as well. But until then, my friend, it's a pleasure as always chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Back at you, my man. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horror discussions, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcast or Spotify. For show updates and additional content, you can follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube at Safe Room Pod. Additionally, you can join our Safe Room Podcast Discord to chat with us and other horror fans about the genre we all love. And finally, you can send emails to saferoompod@gmail.com if you'd like to share your thoughts on a game we have or are about to cover. Thanks again for listening, and be sure to check out our episode of Horror Bites out this Thursday. And until then, we'll see you guys for a main feed episode next Monday.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. You know, one of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.